Let me tell you something nobody puts in the after-action report. Nobody writes down the moment a grown man in full combat kit goes quiet. Not the radio check quiet, not the pre-breach quiet, but the kind of quiet that means he just watched something recalibrate everything he thought he understood about strength, about service, about who gets to call themselves a warrior. Nobody logs that? I do. I've been keeping a field journal since Fallujah. Loose pages, mostly. Look, coffee-stained. The margins are where I put the real stuff, the things that don't fit into the language of official reports, the things that don't have a box on any form in the United States military bureaucracy. What happened with Lieutenant Commander Reyes, Maya Reyes, doesn't fit in any box I've ever seen. She arrived pretty much at Forward Operating Base Kestrel in a wheelchair, folded hands, still spine, the kind of stillness that'sn't rest, it's containment. 3 men in my unit laughed. I didn't stop them. That's the part I carry. By the time it was over, by the time the smoke cleared and the compound was secure and the casualty count came back, 2 of those 3 men would refuse to meet her eyes. Not out of shame, out of something older than shame, out of recognition, which this is what happened on the ground, all of it. The ugly parts first. The honestly coffee at FOB Kestrel tasted like someone had brewed it through a boot, soul, and called it fuel. Though I drank 3 cups a morning anyway, habit, ritual. The bitterness was honest in a way most things out here weren't. I was on my 2nd cup when the transport Humvee rolled through the gate and everything stupid started. I didn't see her at first, and I was watching Corporal Denny Briggs, 23 years old, 6'2", the kind of jaw that made recruitment posters weep with joy, argue with Sergeant Thomas Feld about a busted radio compression fitting. Standard morning like a noise. Briggs waved his hands when he talked. Feld never blinked. It was almost relaxing. Then the Humvee door opened. The wheelchair came out first. Folded, military issue, passed down from the rear by a logistics specialist who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on the planet. Then she came out after it, with no assistance. She dropped her weight onto the frame of the door. I transferred to the chair with the clean, mechanical efficiency of someone who'd done it 10,000 times and had stopped caring who was watching around number 300. Lieutenant Commander Maya Reyes. Eyed her file. 41 years old. Prior SEAL. And when I say prior, I mean prior, the way a loaded gun is prior. The potential doesn't leave just because you set it down. 2 tours in Afghanistan, plus 1 in the Horn. Actually, Silver Star. The wounds sustained in a vehicle rollover during an exfil gone sideways in Djibouti. Right leg, gone below the knee. Left leg, nerve damage extensive enough that the surgeons gave her a percentage and she apparently handed it back. The file also said she'd spent 18 months pushing through a medical review board that had the word no preloaded in every response. I didn't know that part from the file. I knew it from her eyes when she looked at the base, not scanning for threats, not orienting, appraising. The way you look at something you fought very hard to get back into. Briggs saw her and stopped talking mid-sentence. He said something to Feld. Low, but not low enough. The hell is this? Which they sending us wheelchairs now? Feld made a sound that was almost a laugh. Not quite, but almost. I said nothing. I made a note in the margin of the morning report instead. Old habit. Look, 0712 hours, Stupidity observed, logged. She wheeled herself across the compound. Plus, at the basically terrain was bad. Packed gravel and heat-warped asphalt with a lip at the entrance to the operations building that would have required assistance. She didn't ask for it. She hit the lip at a slight angle, popped the front wheels with a practiced jerk of both wrists, and cleared it like it owed her money. I followed her inside. The briefing room was a converted storage unit. Plywood walls, a projector that overheated if you ran it more than 40 minutes. Our folding chairs that had all been broken and re-repaired at least once. She rolled to the head of the table without being told, set her hands flat on the surface, which waited. I was the ranking officer present. I closed the door. Lieutenant Commander, I said. Captain Marcus Dell. I run ground operations for this sector. Captain Dell, She didn't extend her hand. Neither did I. We were past pleasantries. I assume you've read my file. I've. Then you know why I'm here. I did. A JSOC had assigned her as tactical advisor for Operation Hollow Stone, a 3-phase compound clearance mission in the Northern Valley that had already eaten 2 planning cycles and a junior analyst's nerves. The target was a mid-level logistics coordinator for a weapons pipeline we'd been tracking for 11 months. Narrow window, high-confidence intelligence, but the compound itself was a maze. Interior courtyards, subfloor vaults, the 3 separate exit routes we hadn't fully mapped. They sent her because she'd cleared a structurally identical compound in 2009. She was the only person in the system who'd been inside one and come out with useful intelligence rather than a body bag. I know why you're here, I said. I want to know how you plan to run point from... I stopped. She looked at me. From the chair, she finished, without heat. Factual, like she was correcting a typo. Yes, TBH. Mine, I don't. She turned to the projected map already cued on the wall. I run point from here. She tapped her temple once. The chair goes sort of where I tell it, same as the rest of me. I wrote nothing in the margins. Some I mean things you don't annotate, you just let them sit. The first planning session lasted 4 hours, which she didn't have the room's respect. She knew it. She didn't try to earn it with warmth. She earned it the way you sharpen a knife, by doing the thing the knife is for. She broke, I think, down the compound blueprint in 20 minutes, identified a structural weakness in the eastern wall that our engineers had missed, and pointed out that our proposed entry sequence would funnel the assault element directly into a kill corridor. Not aggressively, which not with the pleasure of being right. Like it was simply geometry, and she was tired of watching people be surprised by geometry. Sergeant Feld, in my opinion, who I was beginning to suspect had the emotional range of a cinder block, asked her how she planned to manage the terrain during the breach if she needed to enter the compound. She pulled up a satellite image and pointed at 3 things in sequence: a secondary access ramp built into the eastern walls, original structure, and a collapsed fence section that her infiltration team could exploit, and a service corridor that bypassed the kill zone entirely. I won't be entering the compound, she said. My role is C2 from the vehicle perimeter, but if that changes, I go through the east ramp. I've already flagged it. The route is viable. Feld looked at Briggs. Briggs looked at the map. Neither of them said anything. I refilled my coffee. 2 days before the operation, Briggs found me alone at the vehicle depot, and he wasn't there to apologize. Briggs wasn't built for apology. He was built for momentum, which meant he redirected. He told me he had concerns about the op. I listened. Most of the concerns were operational, reasonable, the kind of TBH thing a competent soldier worries about before a mission. Then, I just don't know how it looks, sir, having her out there. I drank my coffee. The bitterness hit the back of my throat. How, what I mean, looks. He struggled with it, which to his credit, he struggled. A woman, in a wheelchair. You know, on a combat-adjacent operation. If something goes wrong, I said, it will go wrong because of the compound's layout, the intelligence margin of error, or someone breaking protocol, not because of the rank or the medical status of our tactical advisor. He nodded. He didn't believe me. I could see it in the set of his jaw, that particular jaw, and that recruitment poster jaw, but he nodded because I outranked him, and that was the shape of the world here. I pretty much wrote in the margins that night. What Briggs is afraid of is not failure. He's afraid of being saved by someone he dismissed. There's a difference. Worth watching. I guess, night before the operation, I found her at the east edge of the compound, alone. No aide, no escort. The chair was angled slightly toward the valley, and she was just watching it. the dark shapes of the mountains against a sky thick with stars. I almost walked past, should have. "You can't sleep either," she said. Not a question. "Rarely." I stopped. "You?" "Never the night before." She was quiet a moment. "Doesn't matter how many times. The body still thinks it might die." "That a bad thing?" She considered it seriously, not the polite pause, the real one. "Well, no," she said. I stopped trusting people who sleep fine the night before. I stood there, and the valley breathed cold air up at us. Somewhere below, in the specific geography of threat we'd been studying for weeks, there was a man who'd been moving weapons for 11 months and had no idea his name was on a board in an overheated planning room. "Briggs said something to you," I said. "When you came in." She didn't move. "He did." "I didn't stop him." "No." Still no heat. Just that same factual tone, like she was reading coordinates. You didn't." I'd nothing to put in the margins for that. I just let it sit. After a moment, she said, "When I was in the review board, the medical review board, 3 years of it, there was a colonel who told me the chair was a liability, that whatever I could still offer, I'd offer better from a desk. Safer for everyone." "What did you say?" She turned the chair slightly, looked at me for the first time, and her face in the starlight wasn't soft and it wasn't hard. It was finished, in the way a blade is finished. Completed by use, I mean, and I said I'd spent 2 years learning to do everything I used to do from a lower altitude, she said, and that if he wanted to argue about what I could still reach, he'd need a taller argument. She rolled back toward the operations building. I stood there a while longer. Honestly, the mountains didn't move, the valley didn't care, and I finished my coffee. Operation Hollow Stone kicked at 0340 and cold, still. And the kind of night that makes sound carry strange. Voices from 200 meters sound close. Close things sound inside your head. I was in the command vehicle, 60 meters from the outer wall. Reyes was beside me, headset on, map board lit. She'd been running comms check for the last 20 minutes, and her voice was steady in a way that I recognized. Not calm, exactly. I think calibrated. The control of someone who has learned to weaponize stillness. Or assault element was Alpha Team +2. Briggs, Feld, 4 others, plus 2 ISR assets moving on the east flank. They hit the outer wall at 0343, which the first 90 seconds were clean. Entry through the service corridor, no contact, which the layout was exactly what Reyes had mapped it to be. The intel held, the geometry held, the team moved like they'd trained in that specific darkness. Then, "Contact! East, basically, courtyard, we've—" The radio dissolved into compression noise, a 2 seconds of nothing. My hand, went to the board. "Plus," Reyes said quietly, "they're in the courtyard, eastern echo point, and Feld's on the wrong side of the pillar." "How do you—" "Because Feld always goes right when he's surprised." She was already on secondary comms. "Alpha 2, redirect north. North wall, 8 meters, now." 3 seconds. "Copy, redirecting north." Gunfire. Sustained, you know, the kind that has a rhythm to it, not panic fire, or not spray. Disciplined return fire from a position. Alpha Team had found someone home who had not planned on company. Briggs's voice came back online. 2. Tango's down, 1 displaced. He's in the service tunnel, he's going for— "Subfloor access," Reyes said before he finished. "Already pulling the second map layer. Vault entry, in my opinion, is behind the 3rd pillar in the service tunnel. He gets, in my opinion, there. We lose him and the contents." She looked at me. Del. Just my name. Sort of, 1 word. The whole question was in it. I keyed the radio. "Briggs, vault access, service tunnel, 3rd pillar. Do not let him reach it. Go." A beat. "Copy." Running sounds, impact sounds, the specific percussion of a body hitting concrete. Not a fall, a tackle. Briggs because Briggs ran like he was trying to punish the ground. Then, target secured. Vault access blocked, I guess, and we've got him. Reyes exhaled once, not relief. The sort of letting go of a string she'd been holding taut for 2 days. I looked at her. She was already on the radio to the ISR assets, redirecting coverage to the north wall in case there was a second element. She didn't look back. She was already 3 problems ahead of the one we'd just solved. In the margin of the operation log, I wrote, "She called Feld's position from audio alone. No visual, no confirmation. Called it before he did." Then I crossed it out. On some things you don't reduce to a log entry. Some things you leave in the air. Honestly, debrief was 0630. First light pressing gray through the plywood slats. Briggs sat at the far end of the table. His jaw, that jaw, was working slightly, the way jaws do when someone is constructing an apology they don't know how to give. I watched him try to find the shape of it. Reyes didn't look at him. She was annotating the post-op map. Red pen. Precise marks. Feld, who had the emotional range of a cinder block, stared at the table surface. I drank my coffee. At the end of the debrief, Briggs pushed his chair back. Honestly, stood. He looked at Reyes, and she looked up from the map, and the thing that passed between them wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't respect exactly. It was something more uncomfortable than either, something that required him to hold it without putting it down. You know, he nodded once. She held his gaze for 2 seconds, and then went back to the map. I wrote one, last thing in the margins. What Briggs is afraid of now is different from what he was afraid of before. Progress? Then I closed the journal. The coffee had gone cold. I drank it anyway. The bitterness was honest. That was enough, which hollow stone closed clean on paper. Target secured. Look, intel extracted. 0 friendly casualties, the kind of outcome that makes the reports easy and the briefings short. The generals use words like surgical and textbook in a way that means they weren't there. I was there. Nothing about it was textbook. I kept the journal, open for another 6 days. Couldn't close it right, like a wound that looks healed from outside and isn't, not quite, not all the way down. Reyes stayed on at Kestrel for the post-op analysis phase. JSOC's call, not mine. Fine by me. She was the kind of person who made a room smarter by occupying it. And the room I was running needed all the help it could get because what we'd pulled out of that vault was worse than what we'd gone in expecting. The target, I'll call him by his operational alias, Marlin, was mid-level. That was the intelligence assessment. Mid-level logistics. A cog, not a wheel. We'd been told to expect a laptop, maybe a ledger, evidence of the weapon's pipeline structure. What Briggs pulled out of that vault was a hard drive, 2 encrypted phones, and a paper ledger going back 19 months. The analyst team cracked the ledger first. It took 48 hours and 12 of the worst cups of coffee Kestrel had ever produced. The pipeline wasn't mid-level. Marlin had been coordinating shipments for a network with 3 upstream nodes and 6 downstream distribution cells, 2 of which were inside areas we'd already marked as cleared. Cleared. I put the word in the margins and stared at it. Reyes was, in my opinion, not in the analysis room when the analyst, a 26-year-old named Carver who wore the same expression whether he was reading a grocery list or a casualty report, laid it out. She was quiet through the whole briefing, her hands flat on the table. That stillness again. When Carver finished, she asked one question, which, the 2 cells in the cleared zones. Do we know which cleared them? Carver looked at his screen. 3rd Ranger Battalion, September rotation. She nodded. Once, then. Pull their route maps and cross-reference with the ledger's shipping dates. I sort of want to see if there's overlap. Carver pulled the maps. There was overlap. 5 incidents. Shipments moved through gaps in the patrol schedule with enough precision to suggest someone had the patrol schedule. The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when the shape of something bad becomes visible. I wrote in the margins, "The mission we thought we ran is not the mission we ran." The mission we ran opened something underneath the one we thought we ran, like lifting a stone. Reyes found me at the vehicle depot, my spot. Coffee, bad light, the specific gravel that crunched differently than the rest. She rolled up beside me without announcement and sat there, and I poured her a cup from the thermos without being asked. She took it, drank. Didn't, for what it's worth, react to the bitterness because she was that kind of person. "You're thinking about the patrol schedule leak," she said. "I'm thinking about a lot of things. The patrol schedule leak is the one that matters right now." "Yes." She turned the cup in her hands. The motion was slow, deliberate, the physical version of thinking. Someone gave them the gaps, deliberately or sloppily, but it happened, which means before we move on the upstream nodes, we've a contamination problem inside our own structure. JSOC's been notified. "I know. I'm not talking about what JSOC does next." She looked at me directly. "I'm talking about what you do next. This is your sector." My sector. 2 cleared zones, 19 months of ledger entries, a patrol schedule that someone handed to someone. "What would you do," I said, "if it were yours?" She was quiet long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, "I'd start with the people who benefit least from being looked at. The ones who've been doing their job so quietly you forgot to notice them." "That's not a procedure." "No." She handed the cup back. "It's experience." She rolled away. Left me with the cold thermos and the gravel and the specific weight of a problem that had just doubled without anyone firing a shot. The thing about Reyes that I kept failing to log correctly. She wasn't extraordinary in the ways that get you written about. She wasn't louder than the room. She wasn't faster, tactically, or physically, procedurally. Sort of, she didn't perform competence. She just had it, installed somewhere deep, and it ran constantly and quietly like a generator you only notice when the lights stop working. What she did was hold 2 things at once, the surface of a situation and the thing moving underneath it. At the same time, without losing either. Most people, most good people, experienced people, decorated people, hold one and let the other blur. Reyes held both in focus the way a scope holds both near, far, and it was the most disorienting professional quality I'd encountered in 22 years of service. I watched Briggs figure this out in real time over the following days, and it cost him something. I don't know exactly what. He started showing up to analysis sessions early. He stopped talking in the first 10 minutes of any briefing. He started writing things down. I noticed his notepad. The way the notes shifted from bullet points to full sentences, the change in a person who has started listening differently. Feld I couldn't read, which Feld was consistent as basalt. On the 4th day after Hollow Stone, the situation accelerated. One of the 2 downstream cells, not identified yet, not located, just flagged in the ledger, made contact. Not with us. With a supply convoy running the secondary route north of the valley. 3 vehicles, 2 soldiers wounded. The 1 piece of equipment destroyed that I won't specify here, because the report is still classified. The absence of it created a gap in our ISR coverage that we felt immediately. I was in the operations room when the contact came in. Reyes was already at the map board. She'd been there since 0500. She slept badly, I knew. That now slept the way people sleep when their bodies haven't fully made peace with what they've survived. "They know we're looking," she said, and no preamble. On just the statement, flat and certain. Based on 1 ambush. Based on the timing. She traced the convoy route with 1 finger. The convoy ran 3 hours early. That adjustment was made this morning at 0400. The ambush was in place before the adjustment. She looked at me. They didn't know the convoy would be early. They knew the window. You know, the whole window. Which means they're not reacting to us. Plus they're, anticipating us. The room processed this. Now Carver made a sound that wasn't quite a word. The patrol schedule leak is bigger than I thought, she said. It's not schedule pretty much. It's process. Someone upstream is sharing how we make decisions, not just when. Briggs, who had been standing at the back of the room, said, "That's not a logistics problem." "No," Reyes said, "it's not." The word that nobody said was counterintelligence. The word everyone was thinking. I wrote it in the margin and put a box around it. What I want to say about what happened next is difficult to say in the language of operational reports, which is why I'm saying it here instead. Reyes requested in my opinion, one-on-one with me at 1400. She had a name. She wouldn't tell me how she had the name. She said the methodology would complicate the outcome and I should trust the product rather than the process. The name was a logistics specialist, second rotation, assigned to convoy scheduling. Not Briggs, which not Feld. Not anyone I would have looked at. Someone so embedded in the background noise of the operation that he'd become part of the ambient sound, the way a diesel generator becomes part of silence after long enough. I asked her how confident she was. "Confident enough to say the name," she said. "Not confident enough to do anything else." That was the calibration. That's what 20 years of being right and being wrong in high-stakes situations produces, the exact knowledge of where your confidence ends. I passed the name up the chain. I guess won't describe what happened after. That honestly report exists somewhere with different classification markings than anything I'm writing here. What I will say, the gap in our ISR coverage was addressed within 72 hours. The two downstream cells were located and neutralized by units not in my sector. The upstream nodes remained active, which meant the problem was smaller but not over, which is the condition most problems settle into if you're paying attention. On her last morning at Kestrel, I found Reyes at the east edge again. Same position, chair angled toward the valley. Same stars, though they were fading, the sky doing its slow work of deciding to become day. Pretty much I brought 2 cups. She took one without turning. "JSOC wants me in Bahrain," she said. "I heard. There's a planning cycle there. Infrastructure similar to Marlin's network. They think the pattern holds." "Does it?" She considered. "Patterns hold until they don't. Then you adjust." We stood. She sat, I stood, in the cold air coming up from the valley. Somewhere down there, the valley kept its own ledger. 19 months of movement through its dark and its rocks and its specific, indifferent geography. It didn't care about our operations. It didn't care about the names on our boards or the gaps in our schedules. It just kept, honestly, being a valley. That was its whole job. "Briggs," I said. "He's different. People either learn or they don't." She drank her coffee. "He learned. That's worth pretty much something. Worth more than an apology?" She looked at me sideways. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, not quite the absence of one. Something in between that I'd no name for and didn't try to find one. "Apologies are easy," she said, which they're a way to put something down. What actually Briggs is doing now, carrying it, not putting it down, that's harder. That's the right look thing. I thought about the moment in the briefing room when he'd nodded at her and she'd held his eyes. And the thing that passed between them that wasn't forgiveness and not respect and was uncomfortable in the specific way important things are uncomfortable. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You're going to ask me about the review board." "The Colonel! What you said to him?" "I told you that story." "You told me the punchline. I want the part before it." She was quiet for a long time. The valley breathed, and the stars continued their slow retreat. Before pretty much the punchline, she said. I sat in front of 12 men who had decided what I was worth, and I felt something that I'd felt since the rollover. Not pain, not fear. She paused. The specific shame of being assessed correctly by people who don't know you. Because they were right about some of it. Some of what I used to be, I can't be anymore. The physical things. The particular ways I used to move through space. Gone. She turned the cup in her hands. What they were wrong about was what that meant. What they thought diminishment was subtraction. Take things away, less is left. She looked at the valley. It's not subtraction. You lose the form and the function relocates. Gets smarter, quieter, more dangerous if you let it. I didn't write. In the margins. There was no margin for this, the taller argument, I said. Right. The not quite smile again. Plus, he didn't have one. The transport came at 0800. She loaded herself into it with the same clean efficiency as arrival. No fuss. At no moment, no ceremony, the chair folded, plus the door closed. Kestrel went back to being what it was without her. A plywood operations building, a bad projector, coffee that tasted like the bottom of a long war. Briggs watched the transport leave from the vehicle depot. He had his notepad, like he wasn't writing anything. Plus, he was just watching. I stood beside him for a moment, which neither of us said anything. Then I refilled my coffee from the thermos. So, sir, Briggs said. Corporal. She called Feld's position from audio. Not a question. He'd sort of been sitting with it. In the courtyard. She knew where he was from the sound. Yes, he nodded slowly. Look, processing it. The jaw that made recruitment posters weep was very still. That's not for what it's worth. Tactical training, he said. He didn't finish it. He didn't have the word. I didn't basically give it to him. Some things the person has to name themselves, or they don't really know them. He went back to his depot. I went back to the operations room. Carver was already at his screen, building the cross-reference on the upstream nodes, his face carrying its usual total flatness. I opened the journal, turned to the last margin entry, the name in the box, the word I'd written and circled. I looked at it for a long time. Then I turned to a clean page and wrote, "The valley doesn't tell you what it's kept until it gives it back." But sometimes that takes 19 months, sometimes longer, always at a time when you thought you were done looking. We're not done looking. Plus, I closed the journal. The coffee was cold. I drank it anyway, and 3 days later, the upstream node in Bahrain went active. Reyes was already on the ground.